Okay, fine. Hello everyone. I have finally, despite being sick, again, I have finally managed to summon the energy to move my beanbag 3 feet so that I can have a slightly more pleasant backdrop for you all. I'm sure you much appreciate having something to look at besides my face. However, the time of day that I'm doing this, it seems to be a bit weird. The light is making me look like I'm a sign from the Greek gods or something like that. I have like this halo upon me. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with this. I didn't want to delay my March book wrap-up for too long. It wasn't a great month for me just because March just really isn't a great month, honestly. I'm just always so busy. I don't have a whole lot of time to get any reading done. But I did manage to read 4 books? Yeah, it is 4 books. So I hopefully won't take up too much of your time. I'm just gonna talk about them really quick, and then you can get on to whatever you do when you're not watching me, which is probably nothing because I'm sure none of you have lives. Alright, the first book I managed to finish in March of, what year is it? 2021, was The Princess and the Fangirl by Ashley Poston. And I listened to the audiobook, which is read by 3 people, Emily Lawrence, Caitlin Davies, and a guest appearance by Eileen Stevens, who actually read the role of Elle in Geekerella, the audiobook of Geekerella, which is the first book in the Once Upon a Con series. I really liked Eileen Stevens' performance previously, so I was really happy that she came back to read a little bit of Elle. Unfortunately, the other 2 narrators didn't do a whole lot for me, but neither did this entire book, so maybe it's not just me. I wanted to check out this book because A, I really liked Geekerella when I read it in the fall. It low-key made me sob like a baby. It's fine. And also, quarantine has just made me really miss con. I think that humanity is at its best at a convention of geeks. I used to staff this sort of con-like event at my undergraduate institution, and it was always super fun to see people in their costumes and just having a really good time nerding out about stuff, and I miss that. Honestly, I think we should all just be more like geeks at a con. Accept each other and love each other for who we are, and also who we're pretending to be on this random Saturday at a large convention center that isn't properly air-conditioned. So this book also centers on people who are in the world of like the fandom world of Starfield, which is a fandom that Ashley Poston made up for these books. It's sort of like a mixture of Star Trek and Star Wars, it seems like, but it also has its own spin on things. In this book, we get to hear about a character that we've seen in the previous installment, Jessica Stone, who is the movie star who plays Princess Amara. Jess really wants to be a more like serious actress, and so Princess Amara is not the role she dreamed of, but she figured it could catapult her into some more significant roles. The other main character in this story is a fan named Imogen, and she really loves Starfield and Amara, and even though Amara was killed off in the original Starfield, she's hoping for a little bit better in the new Starfield reboot, which is what Jessica Stone is starring in. So she starts an online movement to try to hashtag save Amara, and it has quite a few followers, and she's at the convention with her family, hoping that she can get even more. And because this is, I guess, a retelling of The Princess and the Pauper, it turns out that these 2 girls look really scary alike. You know, it's really weird because like this happens so much in books, but I've like never seen this happen in real life aside from like identical twins. I just must not be looking in the right places. So they decide to switch places, and of course hijinks ensue, romances ensue, a couple of embarrassing slip-ups and accidents ensue as well. I have to admit, after really enjoying Geekerella, I was kinda disappointed in this one. It didn't help that I really couldn't get into either of the 2 main characters until almost halfway through the book. Jess was, I think, an interesting choice for a protagonist because in the first book I didn't find her particularly likable, although I think that was kind of the point. She was this actress forced into a role that she didn't really want to be in. And I was hoping that maybe I would get to see a different side of her in this book, and I guess I eventually did. It took a really long time though. Also, Imogen was sort of weirdly defined as well. I felt like her personality wasn't super well developed. I felt like a lot of her personality was like being the girl who just sort of fights everyone, and although I love that character trait, and I've definitely been that person in my life, I don't really like it when an author makes that basically the only trait a female character has, as if it's inherently feminist to just sort of want to fight everyone. And so I thought for like a lot of the book, Imogen's priorities were like not very well sorted out, but by the end of the book I really started to like her. The plot was also pretty contrived. I mean, of course, the whole switcheroo thing is just a given that that's going to be a bit ridiculous, so I was prepared for that one. But there were a lot of weird inconsistencies in the plot. For example, Imogen's apparently loving parents don't check on her for an entire weekend, and when they do, they don't notice that she's switched places with a whole other person. That's a bit odd. Also, Jess is the one who's supposed to be the Oscar-nominated actress, and she's really not putting a lot of effort into this switcheroo. Imogen is honestly doing a lot better at it than she is. I guess that's part of Jess's personality, but at the same time, it was kind of annoying to read about. I was like, how are people paying you to pretend to be another person when it's apparently so important for you to pretend to be another person right now, and you absolutely suck at it? I also think that this book was just trying to do a lot because there's two main characters, two different versions of the story, two different sets of priorities, and two different romances. In Geekerella, there were two main protagonists, but they were the love interests, so I think that made the story a little bit more cohesive. This story was just trying to balance too much and honestly not doing a very good job. Especially with Imogen and her love interest, who was Jess's assistant, Ethan. They start off really disliking each other for honestly a really stupid reason. Like, there's no reason why they should have hated each other that fast. But I feel like the author just put that in there so we could have like the tension of an enemies to lovers relationship. And honestly, I was not buying it. I was like, I really don't think they hate each other. Like, I don't think they even think they hate each other. Why are we still here? So even though there were a lot of like plot inconsistencies and the characters just didn't really work for me, I still was kind of into this book. And I think that's just because it was set at a con. Like I said, I think humanity is at its best at a comic-like convention. I know that there can be a pretty seedy underbelly in nerd circles. We saw a little bit of that in this book. But overall, it was just a really fun atmosphere. I remember reading something online shortly after finishing this book that said something like, if you had to be stuck in the world of the last book you read, would you be happy? And the last book I had read was this book. And I was like, yes, I want to go to the Starfield convention and just hang out there for a few months and hang out with nerds. I would absolutely love that. So even though the book as a whole probably deserves like 2.5 stars for me, I'm just gonna give it 3 because I miss cons, man. Okay, so the next book is one that I've heard talked about on BookTube quite a bit, and I'm glad that so many people love it. It is a really fun and sweet book. However, I just can't really summon up any strong feelings for it, and that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book is about a guy named Linus who's in his 40s, I think, and he's been working the same job for a really long time, which is a caseworker at Dicomy? D-I-C-O-M-Y? No, not Dicomy, which is an organization that oversees the development and education of magical children. And Linus is pretty good at his job. He goes to these orphanages, visits the children, makes sure that their magic powers are in check, that they're being not neglected, but at the same time that they're not being encouraged to use their powers in a way that would be dangerous. And one day he's asked to go check on this very high-risk orphanage on an isolated island. But upon visiting, he realizes that the kids are pretty much just like regular kids, even though they might have very strong magical powers that need to be kept in check. And he also thinks that the guy who runs the orphanage, whose name is Arthur Parnassus, which is a truly divine name, I really like that, is a very nice and understanding man, and also very cute. The book as a whole is one that I understand why it's hitting people in like that nice squishy spot in their heart right at about this time. It's all about acceptance and finding yourself, no matter what you look like or where you're from, what kind of magical powers that you may have. And I think a lot of fantasy books feel like they need to be really dark, and that there needs to be like a lot of like violence and grit happening in the book in order to maintain people's interest. And plenty of those books are good in their own way, and I do like a lot of more dark and gritty fantasy books, but this one's very light and fluffy and sweet, and basically teaches you that you should stand up for who you are, because who you are is great. So I understand why people are really into this book. I don't know, I'm just not. Maybe it's because I read a lot of, I guess, cozy fantasies sort of similar to this one when I was younger, and so this really wasn't the introduction to that genre for me in the way that it was for a lot of people. And also, I just didn't feel that the execution of this story was as strong as it could have been. I felt that a lot of the children characters especially weren't very well developed. They sort of had one thing that they did and that was it. For example, there's one child at the school who is a sprite, and we really don't learn anything about her. She's just a sprite with magical powers of nature and stuff. There's also another character who's a female gnome, and she's kind of like tough on the outside but soft on the inside, and I was like, I've seen that honestly a lot of times before, and it's not that it's not charming, but it just didn't seem to be very unusual in my view. There was also a lot of, in this house we respect each other, and in this house we don't use words like devil and evil, and it wasn't handled very subtly, and so as a result that made me a lot less invested in the story, a lot less invested than I would have been had it been dealt with perhaps like a slightly lighter hand. Ultimately, it wasn't a book that I think I'll revisit. It wasn't a book that I think was particularly groundbreaking or earth-shattering, but I did enjoy reading it, and a lot of people seem to really, really love it, and I'm honestly really happy about that. This book really didn't have anything bad or wrong with it. It just wasn't my preference because of the kind of books that I have read and enjoyed in the past. I am, however, quite happy that more people are starting to get into cozier and lighter and more wholesome fantasies, because I've always thought that those books deserved a bit more recognition. The theme of this video seems to be me dumping on books that everyone likes, and the next one is no exception. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, and it's translated by Ann Goldstein. This book is probably one of the best known works in translation from Italian that most people have read in recent years. I think it came out about 10-12 years ago, maybe was translated a little bit after that, but it made a huge splash in the English-speaking literary world. My grandmother really loves this book, and so I wanted to read it, partly because I knew that she loved it. And honestly, I really expected to love this too. It's a coming-of-age story set in 1960s Naples about the friendship between two women, Elena and Leila. And I usually really like things that are set in like historical periods that deal with like character studies and relationships between people. One of the things I did like about this book was the way it depicted 1960s Naples. We got a good sense of what it was like to live in that time and place. And it was really striking, I suppose, all of the petty danger that people face day to day as working class people in Naples. There's one paragraph I remember in which Elena is listing off just how easy it is to die pretty young, or get killed, or just end up in an accident in her world, and how none of them really questioned it because that was just how life was. However, the central relationship in this book was a little bit hard for me to latch onto. So Elena's the narrator of the book, and Leila is her best friend since she's been a child. And the title, My Brilliant Friend, is partly in reference to how incredibly intelligent Leila is without really having to try. If she'd applied herself, she would have gotten the best grades in school out of all the students, but she honestly never really seemed to care. She's not particularly ambitious in that specific way. She doesn't want to individually succeed. She's a lot more into sort of helping the people around her. And she ends up working in her family's shoemaking shop while Elena, who is a pretty good student, keeps sort of rising in the ranks, and she goes to high school, whereas Leila stays back. However, it was a little bit hard for me to be too interested in Leila for a while because she's just so ridiculously perfect. She's super smart without having to study. She's beautiful without wearing any makeup, and men stop her in the street and tell her she looks like a Botticelli painting or a Titian painting or some painting. They tell her she looks like a painting. And all the men in the book are falling all over themselves to go out with her. And it just got to the point where I was like, okay, we get it. She's great. Can we talk about something else now? I would have really liked to see more of sort of the other secondary characters in this book, and I never felt like I got to know most of them very well. I also wasn't a huge fan of the translation style that Ann Goldstein chose. She's known, I believe, for translating works very literally, and I think that occasionally that works well with the source material, but I think in this case, it came off as incoherent at times, and I didn't feel that that was the intention. We had some ridiculously long sentences in here, and that were really difficult to follow, and it really did hinder my enjoyment of the book. I found the style difficult to break into. Of course, there's a possibility that that's just how Elena Ferrante writes, but my guess is that it has a little bit to do with the translation, because I did read reviews of people saying that they had tried in English to read this book and then had either gone back to Italian or tried another translation and had liked the book quite a bit better. Even though I wasn't super into this book, I do understand, again, why people would like it. It's a very universal story that I think a lot of people can map their own life experiences onto, because, I mean, just about everybody's been jealous of a friend at some point, or felt like a friend is so much better and more interesting than they could ever hope to be. And so I understood that, but that's typically not why I read. I don't necessarily want to have a blank slate to map my own life experiences onto. I'd rather experience something new and different. So that's maybe why this wasn't quite my taste. I would give this book probably like 2.5 stars, maybe round up to 3. It wasn't bad, just not really for me. Okay, and then last on the list, we have The Queen of Spades and Other Stories by A.S. Pushkin, and it was translated from Russian into English by Rosemary Edmonds. I'd heard a lot about Pushkin and that he was a very celebrated author in Russia, perhaps a little bit less so abroad. I think the Russian authors we talk about here are Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. So I wanted to give him a try. I checked out this collection of short stories from my local library. There are only 4, and 2 of them are not finished. And as short stories often tend to be, I found them to be a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm planning to do another video that goes more in depth about all 4 of the stories and what I thought of them, so I won't go into too much detail here. But I will say that my favorite story in the book was actually one of the unfinished ones. It was The Negro of Peter the Great. I have seen some more modern translations as The Moor of Peter the Great, so it depends on which version you read. And that is a story that was based on the experiences of Pushkin's, I think, great-great-grandfather in the Russian court. And Pushkin's great-grandfather was a black man. I really love this story of Ibrahim, who is a black man in the court of Peter the Great, and how it depicted his feelings of being an outsider, really wanting to fit in, but feeling like he couldn't trust people because of the racism that he faced, which made them trust him less without really understanding why he was displaying that kind of behavior, and how it just kind of snowballed. I was really sorry that that book was unfinished. Had it been finished, I think it would probably have been the best story in the book. And then The Queen of Spades, which was the titular story in the book, is about a young man who is desperate to make a lot of money at cards, and he knows this old countess who has a secret that allows her to win a bunch of money at cards, and so he's trying to figure out what it is, and he's manipulating her and people close to her in the process. And I liked that he's a toxic dude, and the story knows he's a toxic dude and doesn't try to excuse his actions, so that part was nice. The other 2 stories in the book I honestly didn't care very much for, and that's why the overall rating for this story collection isn't very high, but I'd give it 3 stars overall. I did like Pushkin's writing, and I liked Rosemary Edmonds' translation. She does a good job of catching that early 19th century formal style without it being too difficult to read. So yeah, those are all the books that I read in the month of March. Not very many, but hopefully we'll have a few more next month. I hope everybody stays safe and healthy, at least safer and healthier than I am right now. And I will see you all very soon. Bye.